This is Don Davis with the Happy Lab. I'm going to go over Dr. Hook's Guide to Completing a Literature Review. So we have several uh, different materials that kind of give an overview of this process. This document's very practical, so I definitely suggest kind of familiarizing yourself with these steps. Um, so the first step is picking a topic. Before you get too far down the road, make sure there's not a recently published review on the same topic. The next challenge is working your way towards the right scope, usually 20 to 30 studies. Um, so for an article in Psych Bulletin, you may need 150 to 200 studies, but that is a massive project, and for a typical dissertation project, you're looking for more like this scope. But you do want it to be a comprehensive search, so it can be challenging to get to the right level. Okay, step two. Um, there's a little bit of a decision point on whether to do a qualitative or narrative review or a meta-analysis. Um, I would suggest talking with me or your advisor about this decision. So generally, if a meta-analysis makes sense, that's probably the stronger option. Um, so the main difference is with a narrative review, you'll create a table and generally group studies together that kind of focus on a similar research question, but you're really kind of just eyeballing the studies and seeing if there's a consistent pattern in the findings, and if not, looking at sample measurement or procedural moderators. But it's actually more speculative. Meta-analysis gives you a formal quantitative way of examining those moderators. So that's the main difference. Um, so step three is actually conducting your search. The key to publishing a strong review paper, at least one of them is conducting a rigorous search. So you need to keep careful track of what you do so that someone could replicate it. PsycInfo is a good place to start, also ProQuest. I would strongly suggest supplementing those searches which miss a bit with Google Scholar, which is one of the more rigorous searches. And I use Publisher Parish to do that. We've got a screenshot video that shows how to use that. And then a couple other methods that kind of increase the rigor. So looking at reference sections of identified articles, and then also emailing listservs and corresponding authors for file drawer studies. So step four, creating a big chart or table, and these are the columns. So authors, is it published or not, what kind of design was used, participant or sample information, what measures were used, and I'll usually have one for the main variable, often the independent variable, and then one column for either outcomes or mediators or moderators. And then effect size information if you're doing a meta-analysis, or summary of primary findings if you're doing more of a qualitative review. And then step five, once you've kind of made this chart, particularly for a narrative review, we'll need to do some more specific training for a meta-analysis. But in a narrative review, now you're ready to kind of start developing the paper. And I would suggest, kind of like Josh's other outline, I think starting with the method is the best idea, and then probably the results section, because that's kind of the crux of the paper. And then it makes more sense to kind of work back through the introduction and discussion. But you'll see Josh kind of generally gives some ideas of how to structure the introduction. Um, It's often shorter, so you'll kind of introduce the topic and main variables and explain why it's important to do a review now. Kind of give an overview of theory related to your hypotheses, um, potentially moderators, um, and then oftentimes it's a good idea to kind of address any limits in prior reviews if those exist to kind of justify why yours is needed. And then similar to an empirical paper, you end with kind of a present study section where you lay out any hypotheses. So the method section, again, if you find a model article published in a top tier journal, for example, Journal of Counseling Psych, oftentimes you can kind of look at how the method section is structured and get a pretty good idea of what you would want to report. So inclusion criteria for your studies, describing exactly what you did in your search. In a meta-analysis, you'll put the effect size information, how you handled missing data. There's typically a paragraph on the outcome of your search, a description of how you coded things, and then in a meta-analysis, you describe your strategy of analyzing the data. And then in the results section, often start with a section kind of describing the studies in general, samples, measures, design. So remember, if you watched our other screencasts, the STP, subjects, treatments, procedure. And then in a meta-analysis, you'd give overall effect size and may cover publication bias analyses, and then looking at analyses related to moderators. In a more narrative review, oftentimes you'll have a paragraph that summarizes some of the more robust, consistent findings, and then where you really kind of have the meat of the review is describing different areas where there seem to be discrepancies and using potential hypotheses about moderators, so either differences in the sample, differences in measurement, or differences in the study design or procedure that may be affecting different findings. And then the discussion is similar to what you would do in an empirical article. So restate the purpose of the review and kind of hit some of the main findings, and relate those to kind of prior theory and research. Then there's typically a section where you address limitations of the review, which is typically focused on some of the limits of the studies that were within the review, and then areas of future research. So this is just a quick bullet point of what we talk about in greater length, of what goes into a discussion section.